Hi, I'm Rusty Dornin with the Kauffman Fellows Academy, and welcome to our very first hangout for the Startup Pitch with author Chris Lipp, who is also a Stanford Communications Business Coach. He's here to join us for the very first hangout talking about how to really form the framework for your pitch. Also, please remember there are questions on the side here that you can chime in anytime you want and ask us questions. Good morning, Chris. It's morning here in California. Let's first jump in and just talk about, why does the successful pitch need 4 points? How did you come up with it?
I didn't come up with it. This is actually from data analysis. If you look at successful pitches that have one attention, one funding, one support, they all have the same formula, which is they start with a problem, and then they provide the solution to that problem, of course. And the reason this matters is because, as we know from research, you were to do it in reverse, the same content, starting with the solution and then giving the problem, has no effect. Doing it this order, big effect. So it's not only validated based on case studies of what's successful, it's actually based on research.
You also talk in the book about, you talk about it making sense biologically. What do you really mean by that?
Biologically, it's just that is an analogy just to make it easy for people to understand. So, for example, when you're hungry, you seek food. When you're cold, you seek warmth. When you're not cold, doesn't make any sense to seek warmth, does it? If you're not hungry, it doesn't make any sense to get food. Just the same, and when you talk, if you say, let's get food, without first saying, hey, I'm hungry, let's get food, based on the research, based on the case studies, it's not persuasive.
When you talk about addressing the problem first, I was a former CNN correspondent, and the way we would pitch stories even to our producers were that we would come up with a problem, that sort of thing. What is it? Does it hook people's curiosity, that sort of thing? What is it about the problem that is the reason why it should be the very first thing?
People are invested, they want to understand, why is this important? And the way to show it's important, the way to show that people will want your idea, for example, the way to show management that, hey, this idea is going to win customers, if that's what your goal is to show the customer problem. If the customers have a problem, there's an implicit reason for them to want your idea, right? If there's a problem and the problem affects management, obviously then you're showing, hey, this is something that you're going to want, or that your customers, the people you care about, are going to want. If you don't introduce the problem and you just start with your solution, why would anybody want it? They don't know.
You haven't really intrigued them with anything that's going to help them.
Right.
And I think another thing you're discussing too is inside this works for startups to get funding, but it can also work inside companies. Talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely. That's kind of where I was leading this. For startups, let's talk about startups briefly. Investors, just to give you an idea for the audience, a feel for the audience, investors are very interested in knowing, hey, is this product going to sell, right? So you need to show, hey, yeah, our customers have a problem, we solve that problem. Obviously, then, customers are going to buy it. Within a corporation, if the problem is, again, the customers, well, then, hey, the customers have this problem, here's our solution, so obviously the customers are going to buy it, implement it for the company. Makes a lot of sense. If the problem is something that the management has, and then you present the solution, then then it's very obvious why they're going to want it, right? Particularly if you're addressing management. And this is universal communication. I have an engineering background. I'm one of these people who was never satisfied with tell the story or give the data, because what data do I give? How do I tell the story? That's why there's a very clear logic to it that works. The reason I mention that is because this is something, it's universal, but it really is the way that salespeople work too. I mean, there's a lot of tricks and things that salespeople use that we don't need to use to push our projects or get our ideas funded or supported. But in essence, what salespeople do is they start with a problem and then explain how they solve your problem.
Okay, and I noticed we do have some viewers, and please feel free to type in your questions for Chris Lipp, anything you want to know about the framework for when you're first forming your startup pitch. All right, so we start with that problem. Is there a good way to introduce the problem in your pitch? Is there, what kinds of storytelling things can you use, and maybe some analogies?
Week 2, you will learn how to implement.
Oh, give us a hint. Give us a hint.
Well, Harvard Business Review did a study in 2001 in which they wanted to find out, okay, what is in every single persuasive proposal that is accepted by senior management in large companies like Fortune 500 companies, in small companies, even down to startups. And the author, Jay Conger, who published this article, found that every single persuasive proposal, every single one had 4 elements in them. One of those elements was data. For example, you need to have a data point. I think that comes intuitive to all of us. It almost, when I work with people, I almost have to tell them, hey, pull back. You only need 1 data point. You don't need 20 data points. 20 don't have any effect. In fact, sometimes it loses people. But another thing he said was you need to have some sort of emotional connection. And he said one of those ways to really do that is with a good story. So, earlier I was mentioning, tell a story. What does that mean? Here's what it means. It means you use a story to illustrate what you're discussing. So if you're talking about the problem, you use a story to illustrate that problem. If you're talking about how your solution works, you use a story to illustrate how your solution works. Now, there are 2 more things that he mentioned. You'll have to wait till week 2 to hear about what those are.
Well, give us an example of something that you think, maybe a short example or analogy of what was a good story that introduced a problem that would intrigue somebody when they were giving these people were giving a pitch.
There's a startup I worked with at Stanford a couple of years back, a medical device company, and I got to sit in and watch their pitch. And their first pitch was, if people suffer from, what is that when they have spasms,
Mm-hmm.
What's that?
Ears or no?
Gotta remember, it's pulling from my memory here because I want to give you a great example. What is it when you get impulsively, you start to go into spasms or
a seizure?
A seizure. When you get seizures, is there a word for that? People who go into seizures a lot?
No, not like
medical people. But anyway, so it's a really obvious word too. I'm surprised I can't think of it. All right. So he said, people can have seizures at any time. And this is really dangerous when you're driving home because you can, so basically this is really dangerous because when a person's driving home, they can have a seizure, they can crash, and get hurt. So we've created a device that is an early detection for seizure warning device, right? Oh, great, whatever, yeah, right? After they pitched, people were like, it's good, but man, why would we want to invest in this, right? Mm-hmm. So we got together again and we worked on the pitch, and I said, here, you need to implement these rules to make it persuasive. And one was telling a story. And in this case, one story they could have told is about a person that this actually happened to illustrate it. What they said, and this is basically what they wanted to bring the audience into the feel of this situation. So they said the second time they pitched and I was watching, they said, imagine you're driving home and you turn onto the street where you're living and all of a sudden you black out, right? When you wake up, you're in the hospital, you're hooked to an IV and all these other instruments, and your family's around you, and they're teary-eyed. You don't know what's happened. You know something bad has happened. You just had a seizure, blacked out, and you got into an accident. And this happens for 2 million Americans every year. And so we created a device that gives you an early detection of seizures so that you don't run into that. So the idea is the story is making it real. It's more than just an explanation.
Well, I mean, just the way you just drew us in right even then, just making it feel like it really could happen to you. That made it personal. And I think that is something that you talk about too, is just making it something that other people can relate to. So moving on from the problem, you're obviously going to present the solution.
Yes.
What's the best way to do that? I mean, should you just jump right in and, just like you just did, saying, okay, we've, people have seizures, but we've got the gadget to stop it from happening? Or do you kind of ease them in? What's the best way to do that?
No, just go boom. Here's the solution to that. There are other ways you can do it. I mean, you can transition by introducing yourself there. Mm-hmm. I think it doesn't, even if, let's say that you've got a CEO that you're selling this idea to, or an investor who knows who you are. in either case, you already know who they are, right? So when you start the conversation, you don't have to say, hi, my name is so-and-so, my name is Chris, right? And I'm going to introduce you to the problem today. This sort of, canned, almost presentation intro. It's really boring. Nobody likes it. And even if they know you, it's what you want to do is you want to introduce yourself now in a way that establishes credibility. Don't do that up front. Do that in that transition between the problem and the solution. So literally, there's this problem. Hi, my name's Chris. I've got 10 years of working in persuasion and pitch coaching, and today I'm going to share with you how we can make sure everybody's idea is heard so that they get the funding they need or they get the support they need to move their dreams forward. Right? You're basically in that transition. You're establishing credibility.
How much do you talk about the problem before you present the solution? How much do you set that up? How long of a...
People understand problems. So what you're doing is you're creating a reference point so they understand where you're going and they understand you're reminding them of how valuable your solution can be, but you don't have to spend a lot of time. In startups, there's what I call a 30-90 rule. So let's say you're going to give a 7-minute pitch. If it's a very clear problem, spend 30 seconds on it. Boom, you're done. You get to the solution. What? Because you're only reminding the investors of this problem, getting their ideas on it. They don't need to know the whole thing, right? If it's a really complex problem and they likely don't know it, spend 90 seconds on it. I'll give you 2 quick examples. If you got a problem that is, hey, we're going to take, there's a lot of parked cars and it fills parking lots and we're going to get rid of parked cars, by utilizing them, well, that makes a lot of sense, right? I could do that easily in under 30 seconds. But let's say I'm going to give you a startup, I'm going to introduce an idea, a startup in this case, the example I'm thinking of, which is we're going to, there's an issue with the way Hollywood actors are paid royalties. This is a big problem, right? The way that they're paid royalties today is broken. But you don't know how, we're not Hollywood stars, so we don't know how the royalty system works. Our audience isn't, so they don't know how it works. So because of that, what we need to do is we need to go into a little more detail. If your audience knows the problem, spend 30 seconds on it. If they don't know the problem, spend 90 seconds to give them context.
Yeah, and also you were talking a little earlier too, when you're inside a company, presenting the problem could be politically a little bit more sensitive, obviously, too. So you have to watch perhaps how you frame it. I mean, is that something to take into account too if you're doing it inside a company, doing the pitch inside the company about a problem in the company?
Particularly if the problem is somebody that, their problem. You don't want to come in and say, hey, you've got a problem,
Mm-hmm.
Your sales aren't meeting the goals they need to meet, or, your people aren't listening to you. I mean, you would never do that because it's insulting, right? So you could say, hey, your goal is this, but but maybe there's an issue or an inefficiency that might be hindering your work. Totally not your fault, but I'm going to come in and I'm going to fix that inefficiency, make sure that, you run optimally so that, now you're actually talking to the manager and make sure that you get the credit you deserve.
What's the best way to present the solution, and kind of a compound question, and are demos a good thing, or are they risky, or can they be risky?
Demos are important. Really showing your product is important. Now, if you want to demo it, hey, that's the best way. The minute you demo, people say, I get it, I see it, makes sense to me or not, but it's real. Can't demo it. Explain it from the perspective of a hypothetical user. So, here is this, epilepsy was the word I was looking for the seizures. There's a problem with epilepsy, so you can just explain how, the device, now let's pretend that somebody's got this device. Now you just tell the story of how they would use it. So now when you're driving home, you hear the device beep, and oh, that's a sign that you might have a seizure in a moment. So you pull over, you lock your car doors, you put it in park, turn off the engine, and you wait a few minutes. Now, if you black out, great. You wake up in your car a few minutes after that. If you don't, hey, that's okay too. But in either case, you're safe. So you see, you're bringing in a story. You're having a device that really shows the product. You're not explaining it.
We do have a question from our audience, from James Van Russell. What's the best way to frame the size of the problem? That is top down, 5 billion market size, or bottom up and show what can get there quickly, I think, is what he's.
The problem is not the place to really frame your market. By showing a problem, you create an implicit market, right? People have a problem, therefore there's going to be a need for a solution. You know, you crashed, you blanked out on the road, got into an accident, woke up in the hospital. This happens to X number of Americans per year. That's all you need to say. After you present the solution, then you go into the market. Now you can go into more details because now they care about the product. Once they care about the product, that's when they care about the market. And you can use either top-down or bottom-up. Either one's good. Top-down, which is starting from this huge market, like there are 1 billion people who need this, and we're going to work, you know, where there's 100 million people who can afford this, and so we're going to go after, you know, this age group, which is like 100,000. Generally, people say that investors will say that that's really inflated, the number you'll get. So top-down is not as accurate as, say, bottom-up. Bottom-up is, you know, if you imagine Mark Zuckerberg would have done bottom-up with Facebook. He would have said, you know, hey, we're going to start this social network at Harvard University. Okay, great, very clear initial market. And then we're going to expand it to other Ivy League colleges, right? Like Stanford, for example. Great, you know. And then from there, the families and friends of people at these Ivy League colleges, and then, you know, eventually the world. So most investors I talk to in the startup world prefer bottom-up. You can use both, though.
Okay. Again, inviting more people to ask questions of Chris Lipp about their startup pitch, the beginning framework. How well, going into the market, how well do you need to know your market? What are the most important aspects to bring out?
So Rusty, I want to ask you, I know that you've got a lot of people on this call who are startup entrepreneurs, but I know that you also got a lot of people who are working in corporations.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me an estimate of what you would think who the audience is so I can tailor it for them?
I think you have a mix, Chris. I do. I don't know. I can't see everyone who's exactly watching, but I'm pretty sure you have a mix.
Okay. Okay. So the market is essentially any idea, whether you're a startup or you're in a business. There's a business component to it, right? Because you're solving someone's problem, but in order to bring, say, if you're a startup, in order to bring your product to market, I mean, it's a business. A startup is a business, not a product. So you need to explain how are you going to get that market? You need to explain what is that market? How are you know, where is the initial penetration points for that market? You don't want to be general. You don't want to say something like, this happened on Shark Tank. Poor guy. He had this idea, which is basically a cologne that smelled like cash, right? Great, smells interesting, right? Sounds interesting, smells interesting. And he said, oh, you know, the perfume market is a $10 billion market. If we can capture just 1% of that, we'll have $100 million. And the guy, one of the Shark Tank panelists, who's the guy who owns the Dallas Mavericks? You know what I'm talking about, Rusty?
Mm-hmm. I'm not a big sports fan, so.
Anyway, everybody who's hearing this will know. He said, you know what? You just did the cardinal rule of bad pitching, which is you told me like a percentage of the market, you know, but you didn't really tell me who your customers were, and you didn't tell me, you know, how you're going to get them. So how can I trust you, even if your product is great, to actually be successful in making your startup, you know, selling it? Why? Because they didn't know exactly who their market is, right? When you think about your market, you really need to have a day in the life story of your customer. Who is this customer? What do they look like? Where are they? How are you going to reach them? I mean, these are the important questions for a market, right? Likewise, if you're in a company and you have this problem that you're going to solve with your solution, all right, you need to talk about the impact that's going to have. If it's going to have an impact within the company, talk about where in the company that's going to have an impact and how are you going to make the impact in that aspect of the company. Maybe you want to introduce a new HR idea, for example. Great. So, all right, you created the product, the HR product. Now, how are you going to get, who are you going to get in HR? How are you going to get HR to adopt it, right? And when they adopt it, how are they going to get people to use it, you know, that they have under them? So the whole market is taking the idea or the product you have and bringing it to people's usage or attention so they have it.
It seems like you're also saying, too, that you need to show that you're capable of going after a particular market as well. Is that right?
That's exactly right. I mean, you have to show capability because that's what they want to see, right? And capability is two parts. Capability is, yes, I can do it, but capability is also I understand how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's important to not say, oh, we're going to capture 1% of the market if you're a startup, because that doesn't tell an investor that you understand your market at all. It's you just made it up, right? You could literally make that up.
You talk about an opportunity gap and how that can hook investors. What do you mean by that?
An opportunity gap. Say more.
It was just like, is there talking about whether there's an opportunity to be found and whether the market, if there's a gap in the market to create that opportunity. I think you had brought it up somewhere in the book.
Absolutely. But there's not always problems, right? Not everybody has a problem. You've got a great new idea, but hey, what are you going to do? It's not like you're solving a problem. It's just sort of more of like a bonus to what people already have. You think about Steve Jobs, right? When he ran Apple, I mean, Apple was super innovative. It still is very innovative, right? But Apple didn't always solve problems per se, right? We didn't have a problem without an iPad. We didn't have a problem without an iPod. So Steve Jobs couldn't always use problems. He certainly did use problems when he could, but when there was no obvious problem, what he did was he talked about trends in the marketplace and how trends created opportunities. So to give you an example, and it's probably in the videos, the course videos, but let's say that you're going to introduce the iPod, right? Well, okay, great. So there's nothing wrong with music, but what we do see is that people are taking music more and more with them mobilely, right? And they're storing music digitally. And it's cheap to store it on hard drives. So these are all different trends, right? Trends of social trend of taking it, a technology trend, a cost trend. So Steve Jobs said, well, why don't we take advantage of all these trends and create a device that you can take music mobilely, stores music, on digitally on a hard drive. We have, right? It's the iPod. And so everybody's like, oh, clapping, they applaud, they love him because he's so brilliant because he saw where the market was going and he moved there first.
Okay. Let's move into the fourth part of the framework, which is business. Mm-hmm. You talk about the part of this pitch being called sort of the home plate. Why?
Well, this is where you score, right? You can have a great product. You could have identified the perfect problem. Everybody's suffering from this. You created the perfect product now to give to them to ease their suffering. You found exactly who needs it and how you're going to get to those people in the market, right? Well, the business is that home place really getting to that market and finally selling it, making the money in the case of a startup. Right? If you're pitching to management, same thing. You could have identified a major company problem, come up with a perfect solution. You know exactly where it needs to be implemented. Business is how you implement it and how you make it successful.
You talk about breaking down the business plan for the pitch into two parts, going to the market revenue models. Talk about that a little bit.
In the business section, as a startup, and even if not a startup, you got to be concerned with two things. You got to be concerned with your go-to-market strategy. Hey, can I get people to use this, right? I know who my market is. Can I get to that market, right? And you need to be able to know, hey, is this a good financial investment? So as a startup, that's really obvious. Okay, show how you're going to make money, right? Show your costs, show how you're selling it, show what is your margin, your gross margin. Voila, there's how I'm going to make money, right? That's what you would say as a startup. In a company, of course, you would say something along the lines of, here's our ROI. So here's what the project's going to cost, and here's the return on investment you're going to see, right? Now, if you've got a new program that gives people skills, something kind of generic almost, you would think, like, how do I talk about ROI when it's a training program and it costs them this much money, right? And they're only walking away with skills. Find a way to show what is the value of that. Show what is the value of what you're offering, because you can find a way. You can find a way either in other places where you've seen the company spending money on similar things, like training, and then you can use that as a baseline. So yeah, our program may cost $100,000 to implement, but if you look at the reach we have, the company spent $5 million last quarter trying to do the same thing. So basically, we're creating $4.9 million of value for the company.
Again, then how important are showing milestones, kind of moving along in the same direction you're going?
But milestones do two things, right? Showing the milestones of where you've come from, give you a little bit of credibility, give you a little bit of consistency, like, hey, this person's serious, this person's already on the way, let's just support them to get to the goal. Milestones of where you're going. If you're a startup, your concern is raising money. That's why you're pitching, right? And so the milestones in front of you really let the investor know why they need to give you money, right? If you're going to scale and you want to say, hey, we want to get to point B, we can't get to point B. Well, we need to take steps A, B, and C to get to this, right? So we need money to do those steps. The investor will be like, oh, I see it. I get it now why you need money. You're not just asking for money. You actually have a plan. And so I feel more confident spending that. And there's an advantage to this as well, Rusty, which is if an investor doesn't want to give you all the money or they debate with you, about how much money you need, you're set in a position with your milestones to explain that. And if they want to give you less money, you say, hey, yeah, you can give me less money. You can give me less support, if it's within a company. But it's going to take longer for us to achieve that goal.
Mm-hmm. That's a good idea. What's the goal of your business wrap-up?
Business wrap-up, basically it's making the request. It's a really interesting study in which people wanted to find out, whether they could get people to get tetanus shots. And they did a couple of studies, but one of the studies they did is they gave people this problem. Hey, tetanus causes fever, pain, spasms in the neck. So get a tetanus shot to avoid, all of these symptoms so that you're healthy. Great, right? And then people were like, how likely are you to get a tetanus shot? And something like 53% of people were like, yeah, I'm going to go get it now. I feel motivated. But a month later, how many people do you think got the shot? Almost none. So what they did was they did the experiment again. And this time, at the end of saying, yeah, get the shot, go like, yeah, I'll get the shot. And then they gave them information on how to get the shot, where they could get it. Now, how many people do you think got the shot?
Right.
A lot more, right? Like something like somewhere between 50 and 80%, from essentially none to a lot. When you make a pitch to an investor or to a management or even to a customer, at the end, give them the information they need so they understand how they can support you. Make the ask.
What's the best way to frame that's the hard thing to do, right? The hard thing saying, we need $1 million to make this happen, or, and it's so hard to figure out. Also, during the pitch, you're probably assessing the people you're pitching to, how you should approach them. But what is the best way to frame the ask?
Well, you're strong. You don't need help, but you're inviting them to benefit themselves by helping you. Okay. The worst thing a startup can do is, we need $1 million to help us get to this next stage. The investor's like, you know what? I don't care about you. Why should I give you $1 million? If you need help, I don't even want to help you. Mm-hmm. That's not the way you do it. What you do is you make yourself attractive. It's like dating, right? You don't show need. You say, you know what? We're looking for $1 million to get to this next point. And if and we're inviting you to be part of this opportunity. We know we're going to get there. And you can invest in it and share in the returns. Right? It's a benefit to you to be part of this.
Great. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. I understand you're also, can you tell us a little bit, you're starting another book?
Right. Well, the startup pitch is, the audience is for investors, but the techniques in that are universal. And the research shows over and over again that the techniques you learn in the startup pitch course can be used in multiple domains for getting what you want, for getting support, for getting recognition. The second book steps away and gives you really a different way to look at different audiences, and also provides even more techniques so that you can be really successful. I take examples from politicians, I take examples from salespeople, I take examples from moguls like Oprah and other people who have moved a lot of people. And I show how here is what we see over and over and over again from great leaders on how they persuade others to follow them.
Well, you do a great job of storytelling and teaching through other people's stories as well. Chris will be back with us to do another hangout 2 weeks from today. He is on the Pacific West Coast in California. I know it's difficult for some people who are overseas, but all of these Hangouts are recorded and will be posted, and the link will be posted in the class. So the next one is on October 29th, another Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. We did have someone come in with a question. I would urge you next time to think about the questions in terms of what the Hangout's going to be, and come forward with your questions, because you've got a great resource here with Chris to answer what you need to know about your startup pitch. Once again, Chris, thanks for joining us, and thanks everyone else for watching.